Hello everybody and welcome to another game theory video, and this is sort of a new sub-series I think I want to do that's speaking about a lot of terms that I often use when I'm talking about game design, and this is almost more of like a game design 101, and it's really to introduce some of the core tools in the game design repertoire. I mentioned on the show this last week that game design is a technology and that the things that are invented are advancements in technology, and I stand behind that completely. So to get those technologies, you use tools, and one of the basic tools you utilize in game design is your design methodologies, and I'm going to talk about two of those today, specifically bottom-up versus top-down design. And I've talked about these a couple of times on the show. So let's get right into it and talk about what they are and what are the differences and what do they produce and why should you care or use them if you're making a game. Because it is essential to understand your tools if you are going to build something. Don't go out into the shed and start grabbing saws and hammers and whacking away unless you know what tools you're using and their purpose. All right, here we go. So let's start out with a basic term, something I use a lot. It's called game element. What is a game element? It's any component of a game. So a unit, a class, a rule, etc. Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's a broadly sweeping concept. It's just a purposely generic. There we go. Amorphic combination of amorphous and generic term, just meant to encapsulate all the little things that make up a game. Okay, so if you're thinking about D&D, the rogue class is a game element, right? And oftentimes game elements can consist of other game elements because the rogue class grants one sneak attack. That is a game element contained within another game element, okay? All right. And in general, the nature of a game element looks something like this pyramid. Now, this is the worst pyramid in the history of mankind because I couldn't figure out how to build a better one using my little shapes that were available in PowerPoint. So, sorry, you'll have to put up with my... the ancient Egyptians would not have approved, I suspect. But anyways, all right, so let's talk about what this pyramid represents. At the top of any game element, you generally have the concept. It is the tip of the spear, the point. It is a simple one-sentence thing. If you cannot explain your game element in a single sentence, it's too big. Like, by that I mean every good game element can generally be summed up in a simple concept. Let's take the fighter from D&D. A martial warrior who does not use magic and fights the bad guys with sword and shield. There you go. Close enough. I understand you can use other weapons, but that's the general thing, right? I can make it even simpler. He's the guy who beats people in the face and gets beaten for his efforts in return. How about that? If you were going to talk about Lightning Bolt, the card in Magic the Gathering, what is the concept of that? It's a lightning bolt. There you go. Self-explanatory, right? Let's take something out of Warhammer just to bring this all the way around. Let's take something like Pistoliers. What's the concept? A mounted cavalryman who uses braces of pistols to harry and engage the enemy. Okay, cool. Right, those are the concepts. Now, down below that, most notably, it is not story. Okay? Story is the next level down and something completely different. That pistolier, or whatever he is I just described, could have 100 different stories. In the old world of Warhammer, they were well-heeled nobles who hadn't yet gotten their knighthood and were sort of like, they were the young nobles, and they were sort of rambunctious and energetic, and they would charge madly around the edge of the battle and just right, be shooting people up. And they were sort of used as a combination of like Outriders and Vanguard and whatever. That's their story, right? But that doesn't have to be the concept. That story doesn't have to marry to that concept of a lightly armored, mounted cavalryman who uses pistols. They could just as easily be They could just as easily be commanders in the force that ride around and wait for soldiers to flee and then shoot them. They could be like a mounted commissar type story. They could be Ronin samurai who have fallen from the way of the sword and have now taken to using modern firearms, and so they wander the countryside, gathering into small groups for protection and join battles seeking to gain former glory, right? They could be loose conglomerations of holy gunslingers, gifted with magical pistols, blessed by the papal forces, charged with seeking out the monsters that roam the countryside and bringing them justice in the form of 6 cross-etched leaden bullets, right? That's story. That's separate from concept, okay? And then the lower part of the pyramid is rules, which I think are fairly obvious. I probably don't need to explain that too much. Those are what the game element does within the scope of the game. And then beneath that is a very important element that's often not thought about, but it's alignment placement. Now, this pyramid really does design into sort of break. I'm kind of glad the shape worked out how it did, because this pyramid really does break into sort of 2 different things. And the rules and alignment placement are sort of one thing, and the concept and story is another thing. And if you thought about that in terms of fluff and crunch, you wouldn't be that far off. Alignment placement means simply what is the purpose of this thing within a larger game. It's something that sits beneath the rules in bottom-up design. And I'll talk about how when we dig into this. But in general then, now that you understand the 4 sort of concepts going on in this pyramid, you can easily see that there are 2 different ways we could design game elements. We could start from the top and work our way down, or we could start from the bottom and work our way up. Okay? So let's talk about those. Bottom up. All right, well, the first most important thing to understand is that all design starts with a question generally, right? Even if you don't ever voice that question, it's sort of a subconscious question. And bottom-up design starts with the question, what hole do I need to fill, right? Or, in other words, what element in my game is necessary here? It generally doesn't start actually with rules. People often mistake bottom-up design as starting with rules, and that's often shorthand true. Like, that is to say, sometimes the grid filling or hole filling nature of the thing is so subconscious that you do just jump straight to rules. But what you're really doing when you start with bottom-up design is you're saying, what's the open space here that I need to fill with rules? Okay? Now, I've got 2 examples here. The left is from D&D. So in 4th edition D&D, there were power sources: divine, primal, arcane, martial. So there are 4. And there were roles: leader, striker, controller, defender. Right? Okay. Put those on a grid. Right? And you can see that if the x-axis were to be power source and the y-axis were to be role, then what happens is you start to want to fill every one of those. So I need a striker that is divine, and a striker that is primal, and a striker that is arcane, and a striker that is martial. Right? You start to want to grid fill. Humans have a natural inclination to this, by the way. We like it. And Mark Rosewater spent a lot of time talking about this in articles, and so that leads right to the example on the right, which are the maze cycle of creatures. These are all 6 casting cost creatures. They were meant to be things that inhabit the maze that are aligned with the various colors in Magic. So you'll notice they're all 6 casting cost creatures. They have lots of varying strength and toughness as appropriate for their color, and they have very in-color abilities, right? So the Maze Rusher is a 6/3. His stats are like red: high offense, lower defense, right? He's got haste, a very red ability, because red is like go, 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 right? And then all these things did this various multicolored creatures you control do something, right? Usually it just gave them the ability. So, for example, in this case, it gave them all haste. In the black one, it gave them all death touch, and so on and so forth, right? The point is that, like, at some point in the design process, they had a concept for one of these, or maybe 2 of these. Maybe those started top down. Maybe somebody thought, wouldn't it be neat if there was a maze sentinel? Maybe the white one came first, right? And then they thought, well, you know what? We could do a whole cycle of these. A cycle in Magic is just something that fills all 5 colors, or sometimes 6. Either has 5 or 6 sort of replications across all the colors, or sometimes includes an artifact. So this is a cycle, right? And so then from that point, they started, when they went bottom up, and they said, okay, well, if the Maze Sentinel, is going to do this, how could we design the whole cycle to also match that? And so they started with the grid filling. Well, we need the black maze creature. Okay, so let's go to the rules. Well, black has a very death touch thing, and so on and so forth, right? The narrative of these and the story, the concept, is really completely secondary and irrelevant, right? Maybe we had that idea to begin with for like one of these, but the second we started and made them a cycle, bottom up became the order of the day, right? And now we started with filling the grid and then adding the rules, and then we put something on top of it, right? We put a story and a concept on top of it. All right. So what happens when you use bottom-up design? Because you don't actually get the same output from both of these processes. And that's very important to understand. You could occasionally accidentally get the same product. So I'm not saying that like it is impossible to get the same card or unit in a war game or class in D&D out of these two different design elements. You certainly could. What I'm saying is you don't tend to. Okay? You tend to get very different feeling, very different acting game elements when you employ these two design methodologies. So when you use bottom-up design, you produce exactly what you would expect, grid fillers, right? And it's the most useful when you need to align a game element to the rules, as that is what you're considering first. You're looking at its place in the game, its alignment to other game elements, where it sits on the grid, and the rules, right? And then you just layer the story on top. So bottom-up design is really good to employ when you've got a challenge in the game that you need to solve. This particular class is weak, right? Because it can't do this thing. All right, well, from a bottom-up perspective, then, we know what the weak thing is. So we've designed some rules to solve that hole in the class or in the whatever, right? And then we design the story around it to make sure it fits. But the story is always secondary, because it has to be subservient to the placement of the thing and to the rules. So the story is always going to be the thing that sits on top and has to be a slave, as it were, to the rules and alignment, right? So if you have too much bottom-up design, it makes the narrative elements feel sort of hollow and tacked on, because they were all decided ex post facto. Like an entire game designed from the bottom up is going to probably be a pretty rules-tight thing. Bottom-up design tends to produce fairly, like, balanced games, as it were, if that's a concern in your particular game. But it also, if overused, tends to produce pretty boring games, because they generally will often feel very hollow, right? The elements that are in the game are there because they needed to be there for the rules, not because they wanted to be there because of the story or were demanded by the narrative or the flavor of the world or anything else. So a good example of this happening is this card, Wild Mongrel, which is one of the more classic bottom-up designs ever. They needed this card that would allow you to sort of, quickly pitch things into your graveyard for the graveyard focus set. And so they designed the rules, and it was, discard a card from your hand. If you go back and look at the early card, these all just say card name. So, they had the rules. Discard a card from your hand, card name gets +1/+1. It becomes the color of your choice until the end of turn. And then, so they designed that, and then they tacked onto the top that it's this Wild Mongrel. Why? What does this have to do? Now, this is a terrible example, because the story is badly aligned with the concept. But this is my point. This can happen. Right? It's easy for the story to become unhinged from the rules. Now, there are plenty of great story cards that where, even though they started from the bottom up, Drake style. I should have called this Drake style. Oh well, that's okay. So even cards that were designed Drake style, where the story just worked out wonderfully, and that can certainly happen. So please do not mistake me to say that bottom-up design always produces garbage story. That would be very wrong. It can produce great stories, but my point is the story will be secondary. All right, so let's talk about top-down. Top-down starts with this question. What is this thing? It begins with the concept, travels through story, and ends at the rules. The most famous example for Magic the Gathering is the set Innistrad. Innistrad was a nearly completely top-down designed set. They started with the concept. What would a Magic set be like in a gothic horror world? And what needs to be in there? Vampires and zombies and ghouls and werewolves and elements of, sort of Victorian horror. They started with all that, okay? And they said that was their concept, a gothic horror Magic world. And then they started penning the story of what's going on in the world and what's happening and what are the elements that are contained within it, all the things I just mentioned. And then they made rules to suit that. They said, well, how do werewolves work? Werewolves need to be both people and werewolves, so we'll design this new thing called flip cards, right? So the rules were subservient to the story. The concept in the story was already written. There was this world. It was gothic horror. It was infested with werewolves. Werewolves are a thing that roam the countryside. They can be good and bad, but they disguise themselves as normal people. And so, hence, the rules were made. And then it was figured out at the end how they all fit together. Okay? So, top-down starts when you've got just an idea. Wouldn't it be neat if we had guys riding horses using pistols? Wouldn't that be a cool concept? What would the story be for that? That kind of thing. So what does top-down design get you? Well, top-down design tends to produce game elements with a really tight alignment between the rules and the narrative concept, as the rules have to be subservient to the concept and story. The example being the werewolf cards that I just mentioned is a good one. Okay, here's another one. Bane Slayer Angel, very classic top-down designed card. They started with this thing. They said, we want this really BA angel. And she will be, death to the enemies of the white color in the pie of Magic. And so what did they do? Well, they gave her all the angel goodies and protection from the worst enemies of white, which would be black and red. And so, of course, the iconics Magic has a thing called iconics, which are the creatures that are the emblems of the color. For white, that is angels. For black, it is demons. For red, it is dragons. Hence, she has protection from enemy iconics as a way of thinking about it. And she does all these very angel things of flying and first strike and lifelink, right? So they layered the rules on and set her stats and her cost and all that secondary to the idea that she was this, this archangel, this incredibly BA servant of goodness, okay? So top-down design tends to be pretty useful when you have an open puzzle, like, say, early in a game, or you just need to generate a bunch of game elements to fit a blank canvas. You don't really have you don't have a grid necessarily, or you don't have anything to fill in. You're not even sure what your grid is going to look like, maybe. You just need to generate some game elements. Top-down design is the way to go, because you don't have anything else to attach to. Top-down design tends to produce a high verisimilitude. Things feel like they belong in the world, because you generally start with a concept that is emblematic of your world, and then you set rules around that. But the initial thing that started you down the road was probably thinking about a thing from your world, and then you made rules to do that. Hence, it's going to have more verisimilitude almost by its very definition. But too much top-down design tends to produce unbalanced game elements without lots of additional development to make sure everything is well balanced. Because the problem is you're not focused on things like the rules and balance to begin with. You're focused on the story and your cool ideas. And if you lean too far into top-down design, what you get is a bunch of wacky, off-kilter stuff. Okay? Which all probably fits together narratively, but might not fit together at all, balance-wise. The entire game of Rifts is a top-down design game. Every single thing in that game is just somebody starting out and going, what does Rifts look like in South America? Okay, well, it's probably based on South American mythology and stuff like that. Cool. All right, well, what are some things of South American mythology, and what would South America have? Well, it's got these jaguar, power armors or whatever. Okay, cool, the Jaguaro. Great. What are the rules for that, right? And just boom, 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 boom. So it tends to be incredibly flavorful and all work together, but it certainly isn't a balanced game. One final note here I want to make about top-down design is that for top-down design to be successful, you have to have very, very firm core principles. You have to understand what you are building. What is the world that you are seeking to do? You have to say, like, I'll do a video later about the core concepts, about designing core concepts. There's sort of a step one to game design, but which is defining your 3 core concepts. But you have to have those firmly down. You have to know, not every detail, but you have to know what your world is. For example, Innistrad, it is a world of gothic horror, right? They had to know that to start out. They had to know there were humans in it, and there were these things, and these people are doing these things, and the world feels like this. They had to understand all that to start doing top-down design. Okay? All right, so conclusions. All right. The ultimate conclusion is this. Both design methodologies are useful and should be employed as part of a healthy design process. You've got to use both here. It's a standard sort of thing where too much of one will turn, too much sugar is too sweet, right? It's sort of that kind of thing. But top-down, as I said at the beginning, tends to be a good place to start, or to utilize when you have a concept that just screams to be included in the narrative of your world. The example, again, to return back to it in Innistrad and the werewolves. In a world of gothic horror, there needs to be werewolves. It screamed to be included. They had the concept, so now they needed to figure out how to make the rules work. If you had gothic horror and you didn't have werewolves in some way, which was something Magic actually lacked. Like, there were like 2 or 3 werewolf cards out of, at that point, probably 14,000 cards before Innistrad. And there were like 3 werewolf cards, which is strange in a world of sort of fantasy like that. But because they were challenging to make feel correct. Bottom up is good to use later on, or when you're trying to introduce balancing elements for the benefit of general gameplay. In other words, there's a hole, there's a problem, there's something missing. So you use bottom up to make the game smoother, play better, balanced more, whatever the example happens to be. Okay. I will tell you that my own personal bias, as we sort of end here, is that I much prefer top-down design. I like starting from the concept, and I think the rules should mostly be a slave to the story, and then you should use bottom-up design later on to make sure, as part of your development phase, when you're trying to clean stuff up and rebalance things and make sure you've covered all the gaps. Once you've charted out the gaps and done all the really interesting concepts and mapped all that out, I think that you then come back in and do a sweep with some good bottom-up design to really flesh everything out. That's my own personal take on it and my design methodology that I employ. You would have to design games a whole bunch to tell me what you think your right answer is. So there you go, which I encourage you to do. Using all the tools hopefully we'll cover in this video series and I have covered previously in game theory. All right, so there you go. That's bottom-up and top-down design. I hope you found that interesting and useful, and I hope you can think about that as you're maybe making, game elements, maybe even for your own personal games. When you're designing new stuff for your own personal games, whether they be RPGs or war games or whatever you happen to do. As always, I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to give it a like if you like it. Subscribe if you want to see more game theory, and of course all the rest of the videos we do here on the channel in the future. And always give it a share if you can. That's the nicest thing you can do. Always appreciate that. And we'll see you next time.